The security guard looked at the list and said, "Your name's not here. It was my son's wedding." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him over the bustling sounds of downtown Chicago. The autumn wind whipped around the corners of the Palmer House Hotel, and I pulled my coat tighter as I stared at this mountain of a man in his black suit blocking my path to my own son's wedding. "There must be some mistake," I said, my breath forming small clouds in the crisp October air. "I'm Robert Mitchell, father of the groom." The security guard, his name tag reading Marcus, checked his clipboard again, with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Behind him, I could see elegantly dressed guests filtering through the ornate lobby of one of Chicago's most prestigious hotels, the same hotel where my ex-wife Linda and I had celebrated our 10th anniversary, back when we still believed in forever. "Sorry, sir. No Robert Mitchell on this list." Marcus's voice held that particular kind of professional sympathy that somehow made everything worse. My hands fumbled for my iPhone, fingers stiff from the cold and something else I couldn't quite name. Luke's number went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. "Listen," I said, hearing the desperation creep into my voice. "My son is getting married in there. Luke Mitchell. I helped him pick this venue 6 months ago. I've been involved in every decision. The flowers, the music, hell. I even helped him choose between salmon and chicken for the reception." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his earpiece crackling with static. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside. Other guests are trying to get in." I looked behind me and saw what he meant. A small crowd had formed, women in elegant dresses and men in expensive suits, all looking at me with that particular mixture of curiosity and annoyance that comes when someone's personal drama spills into their carefully planned Saturday afternoon. "Can you at least call someone from the wedding party?" I asked. "There has to be an explanation." 20 minutes later, after Marcus had made several radio calls, a woman in her 50s emerged from the hotel's interior. She wore the kind of sharp black dress that screamed "wedding coordinator" and carried an iPad like a weapon. "Mr. Mitchell?" "I'm Sandra from Elegant Events Chicago. I understand there's been some confusion about your inclusion on the guest list." "Confusion?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My son is getting married in there, and I'm standing out here in 30-degree weather being told I can't attend." Sandra's smile was practiced, professional, and completely cold. "Sir, I work directly with the bride and groom on all guest list matters. The list I have was personally approved by both Luke and Jennifer 3 weeks ago. Your name isn't on it. Jennifer. So that was her name. In all my conversations with Luke over the past few months, he'd been strangely vague about his fiancée. I'd attributed it to pre-wedding jitters, maybe wanting to keep some things private until I met her at the ceremony. There has to be a mistake, I repeated. But even as I said it, a cold realization was beginning to settle in my stomach. That's when I saw her. Linda, my ex-wife, gliding through the hotel entrance in a stunning navy blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Our eyes met for just a second before she quickly looked away and hurried inside. Everything clicked into place with the sharp clarity of a photograph developing. The distance Luke had been keeping, the vague answers about wedding details, the way conversations would suddenly end when I asked too many questions about Jennifer. Linda had finally gotten what she'd wanted since our bitter divorce 5 years ago, in complete control over our son's life, with me edited out entirely. But I wasn't going down without a fight. Not on the most important day of my son's life. I walked around the Palmer House's exterior, my breath coming in sharp puffs as I searched for another way in. The hotel was massive, a Chicago landmark built in the 1870s, with multiple entrances and service areas. I'd been here enough times for business conferences to know the layout. The service entrance near the loading dock was propped open, probably for catering deliveries. I straightened my tie, checked my reflection in a car window, and walked in like I belonged there. The service corridors of the Palmer House were a maze of efficient, unglamorous hallways that stood in stark contrast to the opulent public spaces. I followed the sound of classical music and muffled conversations until I found a door marked Grand Ballroom, authorized personnel only. Through a crack in the door, I could see the ceremony was already underway. The ballroom was decorated in what looked like a winter wonderland theme. White roses, silver ribbons, and enough candles to light up half of Michigan Avenue. About 200 guests filled elegant chairs arranged in neat rows, and there was Luke, my boy, standing at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. At 28, he looked so much like I had at his age that it took my breath away. Same dark hair, same strong jawline, same way of standing with his shoulders slightly squared when he was nervous. But where was the bride? I scanned the altar area, confused. Luke was standing there with what I assumed was his best man, a tall, athletic guy with brown hair and kind eyes. They were both wearing matching boutonnieres, both looking toward the back of the room with the same expression of nervous anticipation. That's when the music changed, and I realized with a shock that sent my world tilting sideways that the person walking down the aisle wasn't a bride at all. It was another groom. The young man, he couldn't have been older than 26, was walking down the aisle in a tuxedo that matched Luke's perfectly. His smile was radiant, his eyes never leaving my son's face. And the way Luke looked at him, my legs nearly gave out. I grabbed onto a nearby cart full of linens to steady myself. My son was gay. My son was marrying another man. And Jennifer, there was no Jennifer. There never had been. I watched in stunned silence as they exchanged vows I couldn't quite hear over the blood rushing in my ears. Watched as they slipped rings onto each other's fingers. Watched as they kissed while 200 people applauded. My son had gotten married, and I hadn't even known who he really was. Part 3, the confrontation, 30-45 minutes. The reception was in full swing in the Palmer House's red lacquer room when I finally worked up the courage to make my move. I'd spent the better part of an hour hiding in the service corridors, trying to process what I'd just witnessed and figure out what to do next. Through careful observation and eavesdropping on catering staff, I'd learned that the other groom's name was David Chen, that he was a pediatric nurse at Northwestern Memorial, and that he and Luke had been together for 4 years. 4 years, and I'd never known. I'd also learned, through a conversation between two aunts I vaguely recognized, that Luke had been scared to death about how I'd react to his sexuality. One of them mentioned something about a comment I'd made at Christmas dinner 2 years ago about those gay couples on TV always shoving their lifestyle in everyone's faces. I barely remembered saying it, but apparently Luke did. I waited until I saw Luke step out onto the hotel's terrace for some air. The October evening was cold enough that most guests were staying inside, giving me the opportunity I needed. "Hello, son." Luke spun around so fast he nearly dropped his champagne glass. The color drained from his face as if he'd seen a ghost, which in a way he had. "Dad?" His voice cracked like it used to when he was 12. What are you doing here?" "Congratulating my son on his wedding," I said, stepping closer. Luke looked around frantically, probably calculating whether he could make it back inside before this conversation went off the rails. "Dad, please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not tonight. Please don't ruin this." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Ruin it? Luke, I'm your father. I should have been walking you down that aisle, or standing beside you, or something. Instead, I'm sneaking around like some kind of criminal because apparently my own son couldn't trust me enough to tell me who he really is. You know why?" Luke shot back, some of his fear replaced by anger. "You know exactly why I couldn't tell you." "No, I don't. Explain it to me." Luke laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Come on, Dad. The comments about gay people. The jokes. The way you turned off the TV whenever there was anything remotely related to LGBTQ issues. You made it pretty clear how you felt." I started to protest, but Luke held up his hand. "Remember when I was 16 and asked you what you thought about gay marriage? You said it was against nature and not what God intended. Do you remember that conversation, Dad?" "Because I do." Every word of it. The memory came flooding back. A casual conversation over breakfast, triggered by something on the morning news. To me, it had been throwaway commentary. To Luke, it had apparently been a defining moment. "Luke, And then there was the time you made that crack about my friend Jeremy being light in the loafers when I was in high school. Or when you complained about having to attend diversity training at work because it was politically correct nonsense. Should I keep going?" Each example hit me like a hammer blow. Little moments. Casual comments, thoughtless words that had apparently built an insurmountable wall between my son and me. I know you never meant to hurt me, Luke interrupted. But you did, and I couldn't take the chance that on the most important day of my life, you'd look at me the way you look at other gay people, with disgust, with disappointment, like I was some kind of mistake. Standing on that terrace, looking at my son's tear-filled eyes, I felt something break open inside my chest. Not just my heart, but something deeper. All the assumptions, prejudices, and thoughtless beliefs I'd carried for 53 years. You're not a mistake, I said quietly. You could never be a mistake. Luke wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, leaving a slight smudge on his perfect tuxedo. Dad, I appreciate you saying that, but no, listen to me. I stepped closer, close enough to put my hands on his shoulders the way I used to when he was little and needed comfort. I've spent the last hour watching you from the shadows, and you know what I saw? I saw my son happier than I've ever seen him in his entire life. I saw him looking at someone the way I used to look at your mother before everything went wrong between us. I saw love, Luke. Pure, honest, beautiful love. Dad, I saw David, and yes, I know his name now, looking at you like you hung the moon. I saw 200 people celebrating your happiness. And I realized that the only person in this entire hotel who had a problem with who you are was the man who's supposed to love you unconditionally. Luke's composure finally cracked completely. Years of held-back tears spilled over as he collapsed against me, and I held him the way I had when he was 8 and had broken his arm falling off his bike. I'm sorry, I whispered into his hair, which still smelled like the same shampoo he'd used since high school. I'm so sorry that I made you feel like you had to choose between being yourself and having your father in your life. That should never have been a choice you had to make. We stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. 2 men in expensive suits crying on a hotel terrace in downtown Chicago, while the sounds of a wedding reception drifted out through the French doors. I want to meet him properly, I said when we finally separated. I want to meet my son-in-law and apologize for not being here to welcome him into our family from the beginning. Luke's smile was shaky but genuine. He's been nervous about meeting you for 4 years. He's going to be terrified. Good, I said, straightening his tie the way I had on his first day of high school. Means he cares what I think. That's more than I deserve right now. David Chen turned out to be everything I could have hoped for in a son-in-law, if I'd had the wisdom to hope for the right things. He was kind, intelligent, funny, and clearly devoted to Luke in a way that reminded me of fairy tales. The good kind, where love conquers all, and everyone lives happily ever after. He was also, as Luke had predicted, terrified to meet me. Mr. Mitchell, he said, when Luke brought him over to where I was standing near the bar, his voice carefully polite in the way that meant he was prepared for the worst. It's an honor to meet you. The honor is mine, I said, extending my hand. And please call me Robert, or Dad, if you're comfortable with that. You're family now. The relief on his face was so profound that I felt another stab of guilt for all the years of anxiety I'd unknowingly caused. The rest of the evening was a whirlwind of introductions, awkward explanations to confused relatives about my sudden appearance, and careful conversations with Linda, who spent most of the night giving me suspicious looks but seemed to gradually, except that I wasn't there to cause trouble. I danced with Luke to the Way You Look Tonight, his choice, and one that made me cry again as I remembered teaching him to dance on our living room carpet when he was 10. I toasted the happy couple with a speech I improvised on the spot about love being love, regardless of the package it comes in. I even managed a stilted but sincere conversation with David's parents, who turned out to be lovely people from San Francisco, who welcomed me with the kind of grace I hadn't earned. As the evening wound down, Luke found me sitting at a table covered with empty champagne glasses and wedding cake crumbs. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For choosing love over fear. For being here. For being the father I always hoped you could be. I looked across the room at David, who was saying goodbye to his college friends and then back at my son, this brave, wonderful man I'd almost lost through my own ignorance. I love you, Luke. And I promise you, both of you, that I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for the years I wasted being the wrong kind of father. Driving home through the quiet streets of Chicago at 2 a.m., still in my wedding attire, I thought about how sometimes the most important journeys begin with being told you're not on the list, how sometimes you have to be locked out to realize what you've been missing on the inside. I thought about calling in sick on Monday so I could take Luke and David out for brunch, a proper celebration, the kind of meal where we could talk about everything and nothing, where I could start learning how to be the father and father-in-law they deserved. But mostly, I thought about second chances, and how grateful I was to discover that love, real, unconditional, transformative love, doesn't care about your timeline, your assumptions, or your fears. It just cares that you show up, even if you have to sneak in through the service entrance to do it. The smell of David's famous lasagna filled my Lincoln Park condo as I set the table for 4. It was becoming a tradition, Sunday dinners at my place, alternating weeks with their apartment in Lakeview. Simple meals, good wine, and conversations that ranged from David's latest cases at the hospital to Luke's promotion at the architectural firm downtown. "Dad, where do you keep your good napkins?" Luke called from the kitchen, rummaging through drawers with the casual familiarity of someone who'd grown comfortable in this space again. "Top drawer by the sink," I called back, smiling at how natural it sounded. 6 months ago, Luke hadn't set foot in my condo in over 2 years. Now he knew where I kept everything from napkins to my emergency stash of chocolate. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find David holding a bottle of wine and wearing the nervous smile he still got when he came over. Despite all our progress, he sometimes still seemed to expect me to suddenly revert to the man I'd been before the wedding. "How was your week?" I asked, taking the wine and giving him a quick hug, something that had taken us 3 months to get comfortable with. "Exhausting," he said, following me into the living room. "We had 3 kids come in with that flu that's going around, but there was this one little girl, maybe 5 years old, who drew me a picture of a superhero nurse. She said I was her hero because I didn't cry when she threw up on my shoes." I laughed, settling into my favorite armchair. "Luke told me you're thinking about going back to school for your nurse practitioner degree." David's face lit up. "Yeah, actually. Northwestern has an excellent program, and with Luke's support." He trailed off, looking suddenly self-conscious. "What is it?" "I keep waiting for you to ask when we're going to give you grandchildren," he said quietly. The comment caught me off guard. "David, you've been legally married for 6 months. You've got plenty of time to figure out if and when you want kids. Besides, there are a lot of ways to build a family these days. But don't you want grandchildren? Traditional grandchildren?" I studied his face, seeing the genuine worry there. "I want my sons to be happy. If that happiness includes children, adopted, surrogacy, however you choose to do it, then I'll be thrilled. If it doesn't, I'll still be thrilled. My job isn't to dictate your life choices. I learned that lesson the hard way." Luke appeared in the doorway, having clearly overheard at least part of the conversation. "Actually, we've been talking about adoption. Not immediately, but maybe in a few years. Yeah?" I felt a flutter of excitement despite myself. "There are so many kids in the system who need homes," David added. "Especially older kids, or kids with special needs, or..." He paused, looking at Luke. "Kids like us," Luke finished. "LGBTQ kids who've been rejected by their families." The weight of that statement settled over the room. I thought about Luke at 16, terrified to tell me who he was. About David, who'd mentioned once that his own coming out had been rocky, requiring months of family therapy before his parents came around. "You'd make incredible fathers," I said simply. "You think so?" "I know so. You're both nurturing, patient, and you understand what it's like to feel different. Any kid would be lucky to have you." Later, after dinner, we were cleaning up when my phone rang. Linda's name appeared on the screen, and I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. Our relationship had improved marginally since the wedding. We could be in the same room without arguing, but we were far from friendly. "Robert?" Her voice was strained. "Is Luke there with you?" "Yes, we're having dinner." "What's wrong?" "I need to talk to both of you. It's about the wedding." I looked at Luke, who had gone very still. "Linda, if this is about the guest list..." "It's not. Can I come over, please?" This is important." 20 minutes later, Linda sat in my living room looking older than I'd seen her in years. She accepted the cup of coffee David offered her with shaking hands and stared into it for a long moment before speaking. "I owe you both an apology," she said finally. "Luke, honey, what I did, keeping your father off the guest list. That was wrong. Deeply wrong." Luke sat forward on the couch. "Mom, no, let me finish. I was angry. At your father, at the divorce, at feeling like I'd lost control of everything. And when you told me you were gay, and that you were scared to tell your dad..." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "I saw an opportunity to hurt Robert, and I took it. I convinced you that he would reject you, and I made sure he wasn't there to prove me wrong." The room was dead silent except for the ticking of my grandfather clock. "I told myself I was protecting you," Linda continued, "but I was really just using your fears to get revenge on a man who'd never been anything but a good father to you." Luke's face had gone pale. "Mom, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that when you came to me, terrified about telling your dad about David, I could have helped you find a way to talk to him. Instead, I fed your fears. I reminded you of every thoughtless comment he'd ever made, took them out of context, made them sound worse than they were. I convinced you that the only way to have your wedding in peace was to exclude him entirely. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Linda, you want to know the worst part?" She continued, looking directly at me now. "The day after the wedding, I felt terrible. I kept thinking about you, standing outside that hotel, and I realized what I'd done wasn't just wrong. It was cruel. But I was too proud to admit it." "So why are you telling us now?" Luke asked quietly. Linda reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Because I found this." She handed the paper to Luke, who unfolded it carefully. His face crumpled as he read. "What is it?" I asked. It's a letter Dad wrote to me, the day after I told him about David." Luke's voice was barely a whisper. "He never sent it. I found it in his desk when I was looking for his insurance papers," Linda explained. "He'd written it the night you came out to him 3 years ago." Luke looked up at me with devastated eyes. "Dad, did you know when I told you about David?" I nodded slowly. "I suspected you were seeing someone. You seemed happier, more settled. I was waiting for you to feel comfortable enough to tell me about her. When you said David, it took me a minute to adjust. But you wrote me a letter. I wanted to tell you how proud I was of you for trusting me with something so important. I wanted you to know that nothing could ever change how much I love you." I paused, remembering that night. "But then you started pulling away, canceling our dinners, avoiding my calls. I figured I'd said something wrong, somehow messed up your coming out. So I never sent the letter." "Read it," Linda said quietly. "Read it out loud." Luke's hands were shaking as he unfolded the paper completely. When he spoke, his voice cracked on nearly every word. "Dear Luke, I've been sitting here for 3 hours trying to find the right words, and I keep coming back to the same ones. I love you. I love you exactly as you are, exactly as you've always been, exactly as you're becoming. When you told me about David tonight, I saw something in your eyes I've never seen before. Pure happiness. The kind of happiness I've been praying you'd find someday. I don't care that David is a man. I care that he makes you smile the way you smiled tonight. I care that when you said his name, your whole face lit up. I care that you trusted me enough to share this part of your life with me. I know I haven't always said the right things about people who are different from me. I know I've made jokes and comments that probably hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. But I want you to know that none of that matters compared to your happiness. I hope someday I get to meet David. I hope I get to embarrass you by telling him stories about what you were like as a kid. I hope I get to walk you down the aisle, or stand beside you, or whatever role you want me to play when you decide to build a life with him. Most of all, I hope you know that coming out to me wasn't just you trusting me with your secret. It was you giving me the gift of knowing who my son really is. And Luke, my son is amazing. Love always, Dad." The silence that followed was profound. David had tears streaming down his face. Linda was crying openly. And Luke was looking at me with an expression of such profound regret that it broke my heart all over again. "I never got this letter," he whispered, "because I convinced him his father would reject him," Linda said. "I poisoned his mind against you, Robert, because I wanted to punish you for our failed marriage. And in the process, I nearly destroyed the relationship between you and your son." Luke stood up abruptly and crossed to where I was sitting. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around me and held on tight. "I'm so sorry, Dad," he sobbed into my shoulder. "I should have trusted you. I should have given you the chance to love me." "You were scared," I said, holding him close. "People who are scared don't always make perfect decisions. God knows I didn't. But I wasted 3 years. 3 years where we could have been a family. We're a family now," I said firmly, "and we have all the time in the world to make up for what we lost." When we finally separated, Luke looked at his mother with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mom, why did you really come here tonight?" Linda took a shaky breath. "Because David's mother called me this afternoon." We all turned to look at David, who looked as confused as the rest of us. "My mother called you? Why?" "To invite me to your first anniversary party. She's planning a big celebration, and she wanted to make sure all the family would be there." Linda looked around the room. She talked about how wonderful it's been watching you and Luke build your life together. How proud she is to have Luke as a son-in-law. How grateful she is that Robert has embraced David so completely. She trailed off, wiping her eyes, and I realized that while she was talking about her son's beautiful, loving family, I was the only one not part of it. Not because I'd been excluded, but because I'd excluded myself. Because my pride and my anger were more important to me than my son's happiness. "Mom," Luke started. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Linda continued. "Either of you. What I did was unforgivable. But I needed you to know the truth. I needed you to understand that the distance between you two wasn't your fault, Luke. It was mine." The room fell quiet again. Finally, David spoke up. "Mrs. Mitchell. Linda, would you like to stay for dessert? I made tiramisu." Linda looked startled. You don't have to." "We're family," David said simply. "Complicated, messy, imperfect family, but family nonetheless." As Linda nodded gratefully and David went to get the dessert, Luke sat back down next to me. "Dad?" "Yeah? Next Sunday, can we have dinner at your place again? Just maybe invite Mom too." I looked across the room at Linda, who was listening to David explain his tiramisu recipe with the kind of attention she used to give Luke when he was little and telling her about his day at school. "Yeah," I said. "I think that would be good." Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my armchair reading the letter I'd never sent. 3 years of missed opportunities, 3 years of careful distance, 3 years of a son who thought his father might not love him, but also 6 months of Sunday dinners. 6 months of learning to be the father and father-in-law I should have been all along. 6 months of building something new and better from the ruins of what we'd almost lost. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my wallet, right next to the photo from Luke and David's wedding, the one the photographer had taken after I'd properly introduced myself, showing 3 generations of men laughing together in the Palmer house's golden light. Some stories, I realize, don't end with the wedding. Sometimes that's where the real love story begins. 8 months after that revelatory Sunday dinner, I found myself sitting in a conference room at the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, watching Luke and David answer questions from a social worker named Patricia Williams. The adoption process had been more complex than any of us had anticipated, but seeing my sons navigate each hurdle with grace and determination filled me with a pride I'd never experienced before. "And you, Mr. Mitchell," Patricia said, turning to me, "as the prospective grandparent, how do you feel about Luke and David adopting?" "I think any child would be incredibly fortunate to have them as parents," I answered honestly. "I've watched them with our friends' kids, with David's young patients. They're natural caregivers with endless patience and love to give." Patricia made notes on her tablet. "The child we're discussing is Marcus Williams. No relation to me. Just coincidence on the last name. He's 8 years old, has been in the system for 3 years, after being removed from an abusive situation. He's had some behavioral challenges, trust issues, difficulty in school." She pulled up a photo on her tablet and turned it toward us. The boy in the picture had serious dark eyes and a guarded expression that reminded me painfully of Luke at that age, after our family had started falling apart, when he'd learned that the adults in his life weren't always reliable. "He's also," Patricia continued, "shown some signs of questioning his gender identity. His previous foster families have struggled with this aspect of his development. Luke and David exchanged a look I recognized, the same look they'd shared when they decided to get married, when they decided to buy their house, when they made any major life decision together. "We'd like to meet him," David said quietly. The first meeting took place at a Chuck E. Cheese in Schaumburg, neutral territory that Patricia thought might help Marcus feel more comfortable. I watched from a table across the restaurant as Luke and David sat with this serious little boy, playing games and sharing pizza with the kind of patient attention that made my chest tight with emotion. Marcus was small for 8, with David's same dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. He wore a purple t-shirt and had painted fingernails, small acts of defiance or self-expression that his current foster family had apparently been trying to discourage. "He likes you," Patricia observed. "Sitting down next to me usually takes him much longer to warm up to potential parents." "They're good with kids," I said, watching Luke help Marcus navigate a particularly tricky arcade game. "They don't try to change people. They just love them as they are." Over the following weeks, the visits became more frequent and more natural. Marcus would come to Luke and David's apartment in Lakeview for dinner, spend Saturday afternoons at the Lincoln Park Zoo, join us for our now traditional Sunday dinners at my place. It was during one of these dinners, about 6 weeks into the process, that Marcus made an announcement that would change everything. "I don't want to be called Marcus anymore," he said quietly, pushing his mashed potatoes around his plate. The table went still. Linda, who had become a regular at our family dinners, carefully set down her fork. David reached over and gently covered Marcus's small hand with his own. "What would you like to be called?" David asked in the same calm voice he used with his young patients. "Maya," the child said, even quieter now. "I want to be Maya," Luke smiled gently. "Maya is a beautiful name. What does it mean to you?" "It means—" Maya looked around the table nervously, as if expecting judgment or rejection. "It means I can be who I really am inside." "Then Maya it is," I said, raising my water glass. To Maya, a beautiful name for a beautiful person. The relief on Maya's face was profound. David squeezed her hand gently, and Luke reached over to smooth her hair back from her face. "Will you still want me if I'm a girl?" Maya asked in a voice so small it nearly broke my heart. "Maya," David said seriously, "we will love you no matter what. Girl, boy, somewhere in between. You are exactly who you're supposed to be, and we feel incredibly lucky that you might become our daughter." That night, after Maya had gone back to her foster home, the 4 adults sat in Luke and David's living room talking about what this development meant for the adoption process. "Some agencies won't place transgender kids with same-sex couples," Linda said quietly. "They think it's too much for one family." "Then those agencies are wrong," Luke said firmly. "Maya needs parents who understand what it's like to be different, who won't try to force her into a box that doesn't fit." "The process might take longer," I warned. "There might be more scrutiny, more questions." David leaned back against Luke on the couch. "Then we wait as long as it takes. Maya is our daughter. We felt it the moment we met her. A little more paperwork isn't going to change that." 2 months later, we hit our first major roadblock. Patricia called with news that made my blood boil. Maya's birth father, who had been absent from her life for over 3 years, had suddenly appeared and was contesting the adoption. "He's claiming he wants custody," Patricia explained during an emergency meeting at the DCFS office. "Says he's gotten his life together, has a steady job now, wants his son back." The emphasis she put on son told us everything we needed to know about his motivations. "He's been completely absent," Luke said, his voice tight with controlled anger. 3 years without a single visit, phone call, or support payment. "Unfortunately, biological parents have significant rights under Illinois law," Patricia replied, "even when they've been neglectful or absent." The court hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, Maya's visits with us became more precious and more heartbreaking. She could sense the tension, the uncertainty, and it was bringing back all her old defensive behaviors. "What if he makes me go live with him?" she asked during one visit, curled up between Luke and David on their couch. "What if he won't let me be Maya anymore?" "We're going to fight for you," David promised, holding her close. "No matter what it takes. But what if it's not enough?" I watched my sons struggle to reassure this little girl while battling their own fears, and I made a decision that surprised even me. "Maya," I said, sitting down on the coffee table so I was at her eye level, "do you know what a family really is?" She shook her head. "A family isn't just about blood or DNA or who gave birth to you. A family is about people who choose to love you every single day, no matter what. People who see who you really are and love that person completely." I looked around the room at Luke, David, and even Linda, who had driven over the moment she heard about the court case. "Look around this room, sweetheart. Look at how many people have chosen you, chosen to love you, chosen to fight for you. That's your real family. And real families don't give up on each other." The day of the court hearing, the entire extended family showed up. Not just Luke, David, Linda, and me, but David's parents who had flown in from San Francisco, Luke's college friends, David's colleagues from the hospital, even some of the neighbors from their building who had gotten to know Maya during her visits. Maya's birth father, Robert Williams, the name coincidence was unsettling, looked exactly like what I'd expected. A man in his 30s who seemed more interested in asserting his rights than in what was best for his child. He kept referring to Maya as Marcus and my boy, despite repeated corrections from the judge. His lawyer argued that biological parents deserved second chances, that Williams had gotten clean and sober, had a steady job as a mechanic, and wanted to provide a normal, stable home for his son. Our lawyer, a sharp woman named Jennifer Park, who specialized in LGBTQ family law, presented a different picture. She had documentation of Williams' 3-year absence, his history of substance abuse, his failure to pay court-ordered child support, and most damning, his complete dismissal of Maya's gender identity. "Your Honor," Jennifer said during her closing argument, "this isn't about second chances or biological rights. This is about what's best for Maya. She has found a family that loves and accepts her completely. She has stability, support, and unconditional love. To remove her from that environment and place her with a man who refuses to even acknowledge her identity would be devastating to her. Emotional and psychological development. But it was Maya, herself, who ultimately swayed the case. Judge Catherine Morris asked to speak with her privately in her chambers, and when they emerged 20 minutes later, I could tell from Maya's tear-streaked but determined face that she had spoken her truth. "After careful consideration of all the evidence and testimony," Judge Morris said, "I find that it would be in the best interests of the child for the adoption to proceed. Mr. Williams, while I understand your desire to reconnect with your child, your absence during critical years of development, combined with your inability to accept and support Maya's gender identity, convinces me that she will be better served remaining with the prospective adoptive parents." The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration. Hugs, tears of relief, and Maya launching herself into Luke and David's arms simultaneously. Williams stormed out, muttering something about appeals, but Jennifer assured us later that his chances were minimal, given the judge's comprehensive ruling. Maya's official adoption day, 6 weeks later, was everything her first father's wedding should have been: a celebration of love, acceptance, and chosen family. We gathered in the same courthouse, but this time in the family court's ceremonial chamber, decorated with balloons and flowers that Maya had picked out herself. Judge Morris, who had clearly taken a special interest in Maya's case, wore her formal robes and smiled broadly as Maya stood between Luke and David, holding both their hands. "Maya Chen Mitchell," the judge said formally, "by the power vested in me by the state of Illinois, I hereby declare that you are now and forever the legal daughter of Luke Mitchell and David Chen. Welcome to your forever family." Maya beamed as she signed her new name on the official documents, the first time she'd ever written Maya on anything legal. The photographers captured the moment. A little girl in a purple dress she'd chosen, specially for the occasion, flanked by her 2 fathers, surrounded by grandparents, extended family, and friends who had all chosen to be part of her story. "Do you have anything you'd like to say to your new parents?" Judge Morris asked. Maya looked up at Luke and David with serious eyes. "Thank you for seeing who I really am," she said in a clear voice that carried to the back of the chamber. "Thank you for loving all of me, even the parts that are different." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The celebration afterward took place at my condo, which we decorated with streamers and balloons and enough food to feed a small army. Maya held court in the living room, showing off her official adoption certificate to anyone who would look and repeatedly introducing herself as Maya Chen Mitchell, age 8 3/4. She's happy, Linda observed, watching Maya teach David's elderly aunt how to play her favorite video game. She's home, I corrected, and realized it was true in a way that went beyond just having a legal family. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, I found Maya on my balcony, looking out at the Chicago skyline. "Pretty cool view, huh?" I said, joining her at the railing. "Grandpa Robert?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Were you scared when you found out Daddy Luke was gay?" The question caught me off guard, but I answered honestly. I was scared of the wrong things. I was scared people would judge him, or that his life would be harder. But I should have been scared of losing him by not loving him exactly as he was. Maya nodded seriously. "I was scared you wouldn't want a granddaughter like me." "Maya, look at me." I knelt down so we were eye level. "I have waited my whole life for a granddaughter exactly like you. Brave, smart, funny, and true to herself no matter what. You are the granddaughter of my dreams." She threw her arms around my neck, and I held her tight, thinking about how family isn't just about the people you're born to. It's about the people who choose to stay, who choose to fight for you, who choose to love you exactly as you are. "Grandpa?" "Yes?" "Will you teach me how to dance? Like you taught Daddy Luke?" "I would love to teach you how to dance." As we swayed to the music drifting out from the living room, Chicago's lights twinkling around us like stars, I thought about journeys. About how sometimes the most important destinations are the ones you never plan to reach. About how sometimes getting locked out of one story is exactly what you need to find your way into a better one. Maya Chen Mitchell, age 8 3/4, granddaughter extraordinaire, and the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't even known was incomplete, rested her head against my shoulder and hummed along to the music. "I love you, Grandpa," she whispered. "I love you too, Maya, forever and always." And in that moment, looking out over the city where this whole complicated, beautiful story had begun, I realized that sometimes the best weddings aren't the ones you're invited to. Sometimes they're the ones you have to fight your way into. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they lead to exactly the family you were meant to have all along. 2 years later, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror adjusting my tie for what felt like the 100th time that morning. The navy blue suit was new. Maya had insisted I needed something fancy for such an important day. Through my bedroom window, I could see Lake Michigan sparkling in the early June sunshine, and I thought about how much had changed since that cold October evening when I'd been turned away from my son's wedding. "Grandpa Robert, are you ready yet?" Maya's voice echoed through my condo, followed by the sound of her patent leather shoes clicking on the hardwood floors. "Almost, sweetheart," I called back, finally satisfied with my tie. At 10 3/4, as she now insisted on saying, Maya had become the family's unofficial coordinator for all major events. I found her in the living room, resplendent in the emerald green dress she'd picked out for the occasion. Her hair, now longer and styled in the gentle waves she preferred, was adorned with a small tiara that David's mother had given her for her birthday. "You look beautiful, Maya," I said, and meant it completely. "Thank you." "Dad Luke is freaking out in the kitchen," she reported matter-of-factly. "Papa David is trying to calm him down, but I think we might need backup." I followed her toward the kitchen, where indeed Luke was pacing back and forth while David sat at the island, methodically folding programs. "What if nobody comes?" Luke was saying. "What if the weather turns bad? What if—" "Luke," I interrupted gently. "Breathe. It's going to be perfect." Today was Luke and David's vow renewal ceremony, a celebration they'd planned to mark their second anniversary, but more importantly, to include Maya in their union and to have all their family present this time. The event was being held at the Chicago Botanic Garden in Glencoe, with a reception afterward at a restaurant overlooking the lake. I know, Luke said, running his hands through his hair. I just want everything to be perfect for Maya. She's been looking forward to this for months. Dad, Luke, Maya said, walking over and taking his hand in both of hers. It's already perfect because we're all together. The rest is just decorations. The wisdom of children never ceased to amaze me. The ceremony site was indeed perfect. We'd rented a pavilion overlooking the Japanese garden, with white chairs arranged in intimate rows for about 50 guests. Maya had worked with the florist to choose the decorations. White roses and baby's breath mixed with Maya's favorite purple orchids. As guests began arriving, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, but this time it was anticipation rather than anxiety. David's parents had flown in from San Francisco, along with his sister and her 2 young children. Luke's college friends were there, looking older but just as devoted to him as they'd been at 22. Colleagues from both their workplaces, neighbors from their building, and friends they'd made through Maya's school filled the chairs. And Linda was there, of course, looking elegant in a pale yellow dress and helping to seat the older relatives. Our relationship had evolved into something I never could have predicted. Not exactly friendship, but a genuine partnership in loving our family. She looks happy, said a voice beside me. I turned to see Dr. Patricia Williams, the social worker who had helped with Maya's adoption. She'd become something of a family friend over the past 2 years. She is happy, I agreed, watching Maya direct the photographer to the best spots for pictures with the authority of a seasoned wedding planner. And you? I considered the question. 2 years ago, I'd been a divorced man in his 50s, estranged from his only child, bitter about the ways my life hadn't turned out as planned. Now I was grandfather to an extraordinary little girl, father-in-law to a man I'd grown to love, like my own son, and part of an extended family that included people I never could have imagined. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, I said. The ceremony began with Maya walking down the aisle, scattering purple rose petals, her face glowing with pride and joy. She took her place at the altar between Luke and David, holding a small bouquet of flowers and the rings they would re-exchange. The officiant, a warm woman named Reverend Sarah Martinez who worked with LGBTQ couples, began with words that made my throat tight with emotion. We gather today, not just to witness Luke and David renew their commitment to each other, but to celebrate the expansion of their family and the healing of old wounds. Family isn't just about who we're born to, but about who we choose to love and who chooses to love us in return. Luke and David had written new vows that included Maya, promising not just to love each other, but to create a home where she could grow up feeling safe, accepted, and cherished. When they each placed a small ring on Maya's finger, her forever family ring, as she called it, there wasn't a dry eye in the pavilion. But the moment that truly broke me was when Maya stepped forward to speak. 2 years ago, I was just Marcus, and I was scared all the time, she said, her clear young voice carrying to the back of the pavilion. I was scared nobody would ever love the real me, but then I met my dads, and Grandpa Robert, and Grandma Linda, and all of you, and I learned that families come in all different shapes. Some families look like everybody else, and some families are special and different and perfect just the way they are. She turned to look at Luke and David, her face radiant with love. Daddy Luke and Papa David, thank you for showing me what love really looks like. Thank you for letting me be Maya, and for making me part of your forever. I promise to be the best daughter I can be, and to always remember that love is what makes a family. As the ceremony concluded with Luke and David's kiss and the cheers of their guests, I found myself thinking about circles, how sometimes you have to go all the way around to end up where you started, but transformed. The reception was everything Maya had dreamed of. She danced with both her fathers, charmed all the adults with her precocious observations about marriage and family, and somehow convinced 3 different people to let her have extra cake. "Grandpa, will you dance with me?" she asked as the evening wound down, the sun setting over Lake Michigan in shades of pink and gold. As we swayed to "The Way You Look Tonight," the same song Luke and I had danced to at his first wedding. Maya looked up at me with David's kind eyes and Luke's determined chin. Grandpa? Yes, sweetheart? Do you think my birth father ever wonders about me? The question caught me off guard, as Maya's questions often did. She had a way of cutting straight to the heart of complicated matters. I don't know, I said honestly, but I hope that if he does, he understands that you're exactly where you belong. I used to be angry at him, she said thoughtfully, for not wanting me the way I am. But Papa David says anger is just love with nowhere to go, and I have so much love now that there's no room left for anger. Your Papa David is a wise man. Will you tell me about when Daddy Luke was little? And so, as we danced under the string lights and stars, I told her about Luke at her age. Curious, determined, sometimes stubborn, always loving. I told her about his first day of school, his obsession with dinosaurs, the way he used to rearrange his room every few months because he said it helped him think better. He sounds like he was a lot like me, Maya observed. He was. And he grew up to be an amazing man who chose an amazing partner and became an amazing father, just like you're going to grow up to be amazing at whatever you choose to be. Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and Maya had fallen asleep in the car between Luke and David, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, looking out at the city lights and thinking about time. 2 years ago, I'd thought my story was mostly written. A man who'd lost his marriage, disappointed his son, and was facing the second half of his life alone. But Maya was right about families coming in different shapes. Sometimes the family you end up with is nothing like the one you planned, and everything like the one you needed. My phone buzzed with a text message from Luke. Thank you for being there today, Dad. For being there for all of it. Maya fell asleep talking about how lucky she is to have a grandpa who teaches her to dance and tells the best stories. We love you. I typed back, thank you for letting me be part of your story. All of your stories. Love you too. As I sat there in the quiet, I thought about that security guard 2 years ago, looking at his list and telling me my name wasn't there. He was right in a way. The Robert Mitchell who stood outside that hotel, angry and excluded and focused on what he was missing, wasn't on any list that mattered. But the Robert Mitchell who sat here now, grandfather, father-in-law, chosen family member, and keeper of bedtime stories. His name was written on the only list that counted, the one inscribed in the hearts of people who had decided he belonged. Sometimes the most important invitations aren't the ones that arrive in the mail. Sometimes they're the ones you have to earn by becoming the person worthy of receiving them. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate indeed, you discover that the family you were meant to have was waiting for you all along. You just had to be brave enough to fight your way in. 5 years after Maya's adoption, I found myself in Northwestern Memorial Hospital's maternity ward at 3:47 a.m., holding a cup of terrible coffee and trying not to pace a hole in the waiting room floor. Maya, now 13 and somehow even more poised than some adults I knew, sat beside me reading a book about marine biology while occasionally checking her phone for updates. Grandpa, you're making me nervous with all that walking around, she said without looking up from her book. Sorry, sweetheart. It's been 12 hours. Papa David said first babies take their time. Besides, they wanted us to wait here so they could have some private time as a family of 4 before everyone meets the baby. Family of 4. The word still gave me chills of the best kind. 3 years earlier, Luke and David had decided to expand their family through surrogacy. Their friend Rachel, a teacher from Maya's school who had struggled with infertility herself, had offered to carry a baby for them using David's sperm and a donor egg. The journey had been emotional, complicated, and beautiful, much like everything else in our family. Maya had been involved in every step of the process, from helping interview potential egg donors to attending doctor's appointments and reading pregnancy books that were probably way too advanced for her age. She'd announced to anyone who would listen that she was going to be the best big sister in the history of big sisters. Mr. Mitchell? A tired but smiling nurse appeared in the doorway. Your son asked me to come get you. Someone's ready to meet their grandpa. Maya bookmarked her page and stood up, smoothing down the dress she'd insisted on wearing because meeting your baby brother for the first time is fancy occasion. At 13, she was already taller than Linda and showed signs of inheriting David's athletic build along with Luke's stubborn streak. We followed the nurse down a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and hope, past rooms where other families were beginning their own stories. Room 314 had a small sign on the door that read, Chen Mitchell Family, in cheerful blue letters. Inside, Luke sat in a chair beside the hospital bed, holding a bundle of blue blankets with the same expression of wonder he'd had when he was 8, and saw snow for the first time. David was on the bed, looking exhausted but radiant, his hair sticking up in about 12 directions. Maya, Dad, meet Thomas Robert Chen Mitchell, Luke said softly, standing to show us the baby Thomas Robert. Named for his grandfather and his great-grandfather, David's father who had passed away the previous year. I felt my throat close up as I looked down at this tiny person who somehow already had Luke's dark hair and David's long fingers. Oh my God, Maya whispered, all her 13-year-old sophistication melting away. He's so little and perfect. Can I hold him? Wash your hands first, David said, but his voice was warm with amusement. As Maya carefully took her baby brother in her arms, speaking to him in the soft, sing-song voice she'd been practicing for months, I thought about the twists and turns that had brought us to this moment. 5 years ago, Maya had been a scared 8-year-old in the foster system. Now she was confidently holding her baby brother, already planning his future education and listing all the things she was going to teach him. Grandpa, look at his tiny fingernails, she marveled. Tommy, I'm your big sister Maya. I'm going to teach you how to ride a bike and do algebra and stand up to bullies who don't understand that families like ours are extra special. Maya, David said gently, maybe start with something easier, like how to sleep through the night. Over the next few weeks, our family dynamics shifted to accommodate our newest member. Tommy was a remarkably easy baby, but he was still a baby, which meant 2 a.m. feedings, explosive diaper situations, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes with caring for a tiny human who has no concept of day and night. Maya threw herself into big sister duties with the same intensity she brought to everything else. She researched optimal infant development, created a detailed schedule for tummy time and reading aloud, and somehow convinced Luke and David to let her give Tommy his first bath under very close supervision. She's going to be an amazing mother someday, Linda observed during one of our Sunday dinners, watching Maya expertly burp Tommy while simultaneously explaining to him the difference between cumulus and nimbus clouds. If she decides she wants to be a mother, I corrected gently, she might want to be a marine biologist who travels the world studying ocean ecosystems, or a lawyer who fights for kids' rights, or anything else she sets her mind to. Linda smiled. You've come a long way, Robert. We all have. It was true. Linda and I had settled into a comfortable co-grandparent relationship that probably would have seemed impossible during our bitter divorce. She came to all the important events, helped with babysitting when Luke and David needed date nights, and had even started bringing her boyfriend Frank to family gatherings. A gentle, retired teacher who was good with kids and didn't try too hard to fit in. The biggest surprise, though, came when Tommy was about 3 months old. Maya appeared in my kitchen one Sunday morning with a serious expression and a manila folder. Grandpa, I need to talk to you about something important. Okay, I said, setting down my coffee. At 13, Maya's important conversations ranged from global warming to whether she should try out for the debate team, but they were always worth listening to. I've been doing some research about my birth father, she said, sitting down across from me. My stomach dropped. Maya, not because I want to see him or anything, she said quickly, but because I realized I don't know anything about my medical history. And now that Tommy's here, I started thinking about genetics and family health stuff. She opened the folder and pulled out several printed pages. I found some public records. He's been in and out of jail for drug-related charges. He was arrested again last year for possession with intent to distribute. I wasn't sure where this was going, but I could see this wasn't easy for her to talk about. The thing is, Maya continued, I used to be angry that he didn't want me. Then I was sad. Then I tried not to think about him at all. But now, looking at Tommy and seeing how much my dads love him, how much they love me, I just feel sorry for my birth father. Sorry for him? Yeah, because he missed out on knowing me. He missed my first day of high school, and when I made honor roll, and when I got my first period, and Papa David took me out for ice cream to celebrate becoming a woman. He missed watching me learn to drive and getting excited about marine biology camp and all the good stuff. Maya looked down at the papers in front of her, then back up at me. But mostly, he's going to miss watching me become the person I'm supposed to be. He's going to miss seeing me graduate high school and college and maybe get married someday or have kids or discover a new species of sea turtle. He chose drugs over all of that. The wisdom of 13-year-old Maya never ceased to amaze me. What I realized, she continued, is that I don't need to be angry at him anymore because his loss is everyone else's gain. You gotta be my grandpa. My dad's got to be my parents. Tommy gets to have me as his big sister. Grandma Linda gets another granddaughter to spoil. Our whole family got bigger and more interesting because he couldn't see what he had. Maya, I struggled to find words. That's incredibly mature. Well, I've had good teachers, she said, grinning. Speaking of which, I want to ask you something. What? Tommy's going to grow up never knowing what it's like to be rejected for being different, right? He's going to grow up in a family where being gay is normal, where having two dads is just how families work, where his big sister being transgender is just part of his regular life. That's right. So I want to make sure he also grows up knowing how to stand up for kids who aren't as lucky as us. Kids whose families don't accept them, or who don't have families at all. Maya pulled out another paper from her folder, a printout from a website about youth advocacy organizations. There's this group that trains teenagers to mentor younger kids in the foster system, especially LGBTQ kids who need someone to talk to who understands what it's like to be different. I looked at the application she'd printed out, noting that she'd already filled in most of the information. I want to apply to be a mentor, she said. I want to be for some other kid what you and my dads were for me. Someone who sees them for who they really are and loves that person. Maya, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Your parents are going to be so proud of you. Will you help me with the application essay? It asks about a time when someone believed in me even when I couldn't believe in myself. I'd be honored. That evening, Maya, Luke, David, and I sat in their living room working on her essay while Tommy slept peacefully in his bouncy seat nearby. As Maya typed away on Luke's laptop, occasionally asking for help with a phrase or a transition, I marveled at how this young woman had taken her own experiences with rejection, fear, and ultimately acceptance, and was already planning to use them to help others. Listen to this part, she said, reading from the screen. When I was 8, I thought family was something that happened to you, something you had no control over. But I learned that the most important families are the ones we choose, and the ones that choose us back. I want to help other kids understand that being different isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something that makes you capable of extraordinary love and understanding. Luke wiped his eyes. David reached over and squeezed Maya's shoulder. And I sat there thinking about circles again. How Maya, who had once needed someone to believe in her, was now ready to be that person for someone else. One more thing, Maya said, saving her document and closing the laptop. I've been thinking about names. Names? David asked. For when I get older and maybe want to change my last name. I know Chen Mitchell is long and complicated, but I like having pieces of both my dads in my name. But I was thinking, what if I added one more piece? She looked at me with a shy smile. What would you think about Maya Chen Mitchell Roberts? To honor Grandpa Robert and Great-Grandpa Thomas Robert? The room went very quiet, except for Tommy's soft breathing and the distant sounds of Chicago traffic outside their window. Maya, I managed to say, that would mean the world to me. Good, she said, settling back into the couch cushions with the satisfaction of someone who had just solved a particularly complex equation. Because family names should reflect the whole family, don't you think? As I drove home that night, I thought about legacy, not the kind that comes from money or achievements, but the kind that lives in the hearts and minds of people who carry your influence forward into the world. Maya would be someone's mentor, someone's safe harbor, someone's proof that love and acceptance could triumph over fear and rejection. And someday, Tommy would grow up with the unshakable knowledge that love comes in many forms, that families are created through choice as much as biology, and that his big sister and grandfather had fought their way through darkness to create the light he was born into. Some stories, I realized, don't just have happy endings. Some stories become the beginning of even better stories for the next generation.